Welcome to today's webinar on public cloud visibility, compliance and security. In this session, we aim to demonstrate how you can take control of the security and compliance posture of your AWS, Azure and Google Cloud environments. The concepts around securing public cloud workloads are well understood, but can be challenging to operationalize at scale. We believe that CloudGuard Dome9 provides the answer. Before we commence the webinar, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's session. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the Q&A pane of the control panel. We will be delighted to hear from you, of course. Please send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we will address them during the live Q&A at the end. We will be recording the webinar today, so please do sit back, relax, and enjoy the session. I would now like to introduce today's speakers. We are delighted to welcome Dome9 subject expert Richard Flanders. Richard is Head of Cloud Security UK at Checkpoint Software. We will also hear from Raza Rizvi, Technical Director at Activereach. Raza has oversight of all Activereach Dome9 deployments. Richard, I will now hand over to you to speak on public cloud security and compliance.
Thank you, Lorna. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Sorry, we lost you there momentarily.
Yes, no problem. So, can you see my screen?
Yes, loud and clear. Everything's presenting as it should do. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Lorna, for that introduction, and thank you to Activereach for the opportunity to speak to everybody this morning. We work very closely with Activereach around securing public and private cloud environments for customers, and that relationship is well established, and they have a deep understanding of the way that these solutions are applied in a customer context. So thank you for that. I'm going to talk this morning primarily about public cloud, and perhaps hybrid as well, touching on that. Probably less about private cloud, because I'm going to focus on one particular solution this morning. But if you have any questions about the private cloud piece, please do come back to us via the chat box or afterwards when we'll share details. So I'm going to cover this morning how you can protect your public, private and hybrid cloud environments. This has become a very important subject for so many people, given that so many organizations are looking to move to the cloud, or indeed have already moved to the cloud, or have actually been born in the cloud where they have no internal infrastructure of their own at all and rely upon some kind of public cloud platform for their entire business. So traditionally, we have the data center versus cloud argument. When I say data center, I mean internal data center run and managed and owned by an individual organization. And in that world, of course, it was very much more straightforward in terms of hosting applications and data within that data center environment, because you had on-premise infrastructure, on-premise applications deployed by teams of individuals who knew those applications extremely well and were able to manage the internal infrastructure and apply tight control over the security of that infrastructure and the compliance to data regulation that was required in that space. But of course, times have changed, and with movement to cloud, to public and private cloud platforms, we've seen cloud applications and infrastructure proliferate, deployed by multiple teams, not just under the control of IT administrators. And within that, that context, there is a high likelihood of inconsistency and misconfiguration. Somebody's going to make a mistake in terms of deploying cloud applications and data and leaving it vulnerable to the many vectors of attack that we've seen emerge over the last 2 to 3 years. It's our contention at Checkpoint that you need to be protecting your data within the cloud with as much, if not more, rigor and attention to detail as you always did in the traditional data center environment. So applying threat protection technologies right across the board, not just internally, but within the cloud space as well. And we're cognizant of the fact that there are native security controls within the cloud, but it's our contention that those are insufficient to meet corporate needs right now. So there is a necessity to augment the controls that the likes of AWS and Azure and Google Cloud offer you. So let's have a brief look at security challenges in this space. First, we have the infrastructure challenge piece. And I've got a note there around shared responsibility. A lot of organizations are not absolutely focused on the fact that when they adopt a cloud platform or use a cloud platform, they are entering into a shared responsibility model with the cloud platform provider. The cloud platform provider will undertake to keep the platform itself secure as possible, but what they will specifically not do is take responsibility for protecting customer applications and data against the sort of attacks that we've been seeing emerging over the last decade or so. And that means that if data or applications are compromised, exfiltrated from the cloud infrastructure, the cloud provider will not take responsibility for that. It is up to the user to ensure that their data is adequately protected in that space. And that's right across all the cloud providers. There's nobody who will provide an undertaking to protect your data, absolutely. And then there's the visibility factor, the fact that we do not have visibility of the infrastructure on which the applications and data are hosted, could be anywhere. The fact that it's in a space where there are ever-changing workloads, in other words, virtual machines being spun up, spun down, dynamics within the deployment changing constantly, very, very difficult to apply any kind of static security model onto to that space. And then finally, multi-cloud, in other words, using multiple public clouds or a hybrid model of private and public cloud make for a more complex security landscape in terms of applying a security model consistently right across those cloud deployments. Then we have the internal risks in terms of misconfiguration. Around 70% of the serious cases of data loss, of breaches, of security incidents are predicated on some kind of misconfiguration that has happened within the organization. So somebody has, for example, left a S3 bucket open within AWS. Somebody has made a mistake in the way that they configured the networking within Azure, and that has left the customer vulnerable to attack. There's insider threat, of course, those internally who would do you harm, much less common, but still relevant. And then there's the compliance piece in terms of how do I stay compliant with data regulation within the cloud whilst trying to keep it all secure. And then thirdly, the external threats, the traditional stuff that we've all come to know and hate in terms of malware, zero-day threat, the fact that account credentials can be compromised and taken over, and Generation 5 attacks, very specific and very highly tuned attacks to attack a particular vulnerability within the infrastructure. Those are still existent, those are still being used as part of the efforts that hackers are making to try and compromise cloud deployments. So just to reiterate on shared responsibility, the provider is responsible for hardware, the software-defined network perhaps running underneath, the networking and internet connection of their platform, but the customer is responsible for application code, application data, the access that individuals have to that cloud, and compliance, indeed being compliant with data regs. So let's look at the multi-cloud challenge. If you're using multiple clouds, say for example, you're using Google Cloud and Azure, which is quite feasible because you might want to use one or the other depending on costs at a particular time, it's going to present you with a manageability problem. Relying on the native security controls that cloud providers give you limits the ability to manage security right across your total cloud environment. And trying to maintain a consistent security posture and governance policies right across that cloud deployment is very difficult because different cloud providers do their security in different ways. And it's very difficult using native controls to apply a consistent security posture right across multi-cloud environments simultaneously. And it's difficult to protect against attacks across applications that might be distributed partly within internal infrastructure, but also within a cloud deployment. And then finally, different cloud environments can't simultaneously change. They won't talk to each other and apply security enforcement in real time using native controls. They just can't do that. They're not engineered to talk to each other at a security level and deploy changes in environments simultaneously to maintain a consistent security posture. So clearly where we're going with this is that there is a solution required to manage that whole piece over and above what the platform providers can offer. So our top 5 security guidelines for cloud would be: make sure, first of all, that you're protecting all assets, virtual machines, containers, the serverless function within the cloud, any PaaS platform as a service, particular items that you're using, applications, etc. Everything must be taken into account when you're planning your security. Secondarily, apply all the traditional disciplines that you would use within the data center space, apply them within the cloud. So hardening, compliance, access, who has access to the cloud in the same way as who had access to the traditional data center. What are the threats? Look at DLP, look at data loss prevention, all of those things. Applying all those security aspects in the same way as you would do traditionally. However, in terms of enabling DevOps and IT to make the most of the fact that you've moved to cloud or are using cloud, you must look at automated deployment, adaptive policy, in other words, a security engine which adapts to changes that are happening within the cloud environment constantly. Fourthly, secure all your clouds. So AWS, Azure, Google, anything that you're using in terms of cloud platform must be secured with as much rigor as you would secure your traditional data center environment. And fifthly, don't ignore the native controls. Leverage the native controls that are there in terms of logs, in terms of remediation orchestration tools that are provided, but augment them with a solution that can bring all those strands together and provide you with a manageable, consistent, and very secure environment moving forward. So, change the way security is implemented in your cloud. Implement security that's flexible and agile and can keep up with the constant changes of the dynamic nature of the cloud platform. Apply security that enables the business, that doesn't hold you back. In the traditional model, there have been complaints that, oh, security is holding us up. That model no longer exists. There is a solution out there which can enable you to be, enable the business while remaining secure. And apply security that prevents advanced threats. Having the technology to deploy the security is all well and good, but unless within that deployment is security that prevents the sort of threats that we're seeing emerging currently, then it'll be a waste of time. So we'd urge anybody to look at that in detail. So Checkpoint's answer to this cloud security conundrum is the CloudGuard suite. Now you'll see that this is broken down into 5 different elements. We have top left, CloudGuard SaaS, which is a solution to prevent attacks on SaaS applications that you might be using within your business, be that Office 365, be that Salesforce, any of those, and cloud-based email attacks that might come at the business. Secondarily, along the bottom, we'll see 3 elements of CloudGuard IaaS. CloudGuard IaaS is a way of protecting at the network level cloud deployments within public and private cloud. So in the case of public cloud, it provides access control and advanced threat prevention at the networking level. It will deploy virtualized gateways containing all the technology that Checkpoint's been working on, threat prevention technology, for the last 25 years in terms of antivirus, anti-bot, data loss prevention, etc., all in one virtualized gateway that can be deployed within the public or private cloud and controlled from a central point. So in the same way that traditionally you'd deploy a hardware software device within the data center, a gateway of some sort, or a security hub, this is effectively taking that hardware software appliance and squeezing it into a virtualized software only gateway that can be deployed into the cloud. Now we can do that in private cloud also, in terms of preventing the proliferation between element to element, virtual machine to virtual machine in an east-west fashion within the cloud. We can deploy those gateways in between machines, which apply inspection and will root out any potential issues that might spread within the infrastructure if you didn't have that gateway there. And then in the center, we have the controller, which is key to all of this, which is basically reviewing the security posture right across all clouds simultaneously and allowing the deployment and change of any gateway in order to accommodate changes that are being made within that environment. So if you're running say for example, a private cloud, and somebody changes something within that private cloud, spins up a machine, spins down a machine, then the controller in CloudGuard IaaS will see that, and it will deploy the appropriate security at the appropriate time to protect it automatically. You couldn't do this manually. It has to be a software-driven function, and it will drive a security posture continuously by monitoring the whole deployment and pushing into service or taking out of service gateways whenever that's required. So a completely adaptive solution that will also do that within public cloud. Finally, on the top right, we have our Dome9 solution, which Checkpoint acquired about a year ago. Dome9 is a software as a service, and it delivers massive visibility and the ability to be compliant within public cloud deployments. And that's what I'm going to talk about primarily now. Dome9 is as I say, a software as a service, and it has essentially 4 pillars. It has network security to augment the existing security you might have within your cloud environment, the ability to drive continuous compliance within the cloud deployment, the ability to apply privileged identity protection, in other words, identity access management, who can access the cloud for how long and which bit of it. And then we can link back into cloud threat intelligence, knowing what bad looks like. In other words, understanding that something is questionable and stopping it before it compromises the environment. So 4 essential pillars to the tool. And the first one is network and security visibility. So what you are seeing is on the screen is a screenshot of a cloud deployment in AWS. And what this is showing is each element within the cloud deployment, be that a database or a web server or a load balancer or anything. It is showing you in terms of its security posture where that element lies within the infrastructure. So you'll see along the top a colored band that we that was divided up into various sectors: external zone, DMZ, partially open, effectively internal, and internal zone. And we call these swim lanes. And into each of these swim lanes, the tool has sorted each element within the cloud deployment and alerted the administrator to where it sits in terms of its vulnerability. So we'll see on the left-hand side, all the web-facing open to the internet elements, and then we move through the deployment and see what is lying in various areas, right through to including the internal zone, where we really don't want any of those elements on the right-hand side to be connected to the outside world. We want them interconnected to different elements within our cloud. And you'll also see that the element marked DB server, that's a database server. Someone's clicked on that and it's turned blue. And you'll see in the right-hand side, the right-hand column, we have all the security elements of that particular database are appended in the right-hand column. So all the different characteristics pertaining to that database are highlighted on the right-hand side. And crucially, this gives you the ability to click through and alter those attributes so that you can alter the security posture of that particular element within your environment. So if you found, for instance, that database is connected somehow to the outside world via some kind of connection that you weren't aware of, then you can alter that within this environment, alter what it's connected to in order to secure it and place it more effectively in the internal zone. So you'll also notice that the lines interconnecting the elements within the chart are indicating VPC flow logs. In other words, what is flowing between the different elements and how does it affect their particular security posture. So a very graphic, a very instant review of what is the security posture of the various elements within my cloud deployment, how are they interconnected, and how is that affecting my security posture. So automatic discovery and classification of security groups by exposure level. So how are they exposed? How vulnerable are they? Intuitive visualization of topology. What is connected to what and how is that affecting my security posture? Object-based IP management. In other words, treating everything as an object, because IP addresses obviously can change within a dynamic environment. So we treat everything as an object. VPC flow log overlay, as you can see, for analysis of traffic, what's flowing between what at any one time, and crucially, and most importantly, click-through remediation. So the ability to change things in order to strengthen the security posture of a particular element within the infrastructure. Secondarily, cloud compliance. It's really, really difficult to extract information from a cloud deployment to understand exactly how compliant it is with either published standards or internal data standards that you might have within an organization. What this tool can do is it can look at a deployment, in this instance an AWS deployment. It can measure how compliant that is with, in this instance, AWS CIS Foundations version 1.1, and then give a report back on how close you are to being compliant with that particular standard. Now, in this instance, you'll see that unfortunately it's failed quite dramatically. And at the bottom of the slide, you'll see the results displayed. That is a list of prioritized actions which administrators need to take in order to make the deployment more compliant with this particular standard. Now, there are over 500, well, in fact, thousands of standards built into the tool itself. So that includes things like PCC, PCI DSS, HIPAA, ISO 27001, GDPR, all of those different standards that we've seen businesses have to be compliant with are built into this tool. So day by day, even hour by hour, if you wish, you can measure how compliant you are with a particular standard. Crucially, you can also write your own standards using what is known as governance specification language, GSL. I'll cover that off in a second. But just in terms of this particular screen, it will run thousands of security checks to ensure how compliant you are with different standards. There are multiple compliance standards built into the tool, which are regularly updated at the back end. Remember, this is software as a service. This is not something you have to update regularly. This is done at the Dome9 end of things. So those standards are kept absolutely up to date. And so daily, hourly, whatever you wish, you can run multiple compliance checks against those standards. You can compile a compliance posture history. Where were we 6 months ago, 6 weeks ago, 6 days ago, etc. And that will provide you with extensive entity and service coverage across those three platforms, AWS, Azure, and GCP. This data can be printed, but it could also drive a compliance loop, and we'll look at that in detail in a second. What it means is, if the auditors come knocking one day and say, how compliant are you with ISO 27001 or GDPR or something, you can instantly, at a glance, takes about 5 minutes maximum to run this tool, then it will report back and show you exactly how compliant you are with various regulations. To do this as a professional services exercise, it would take weeks to extract this data. This is instant. I mentioned it will drive a compliance loop. What this does is you run a compliance test that feeds the data into the sort of compliance report that we've just seen, which can then be compiled into by the tool into a summary report, which outputs to whichever service tool you might be using. So for example, ServiceNow, Jira, or Slack, and it will then kick off the ability to drive cloud bots, part of the Dome9 tool, into the environment to check for issues that are making you non-compliant, and then reporting back via the report. So closing the loop, if you like, on driving automated compliance. So you can keep on driving that loop and having that process run in the background in order to remediate the issues that are causing you to be non-compliant in the first place. You can also, of course, ask it simply to report back to you what the problems are, and then you can make a value decision based on what you want to do with the infrastructure in order to make it more compliant. So you have a choice there. I mentioned that if you have your own data governance rules, regulations within your organization, then they can be written into the tool using the governance specification language, which allows Dome9 users to create their own compliance and security rules within using a very concise and common English-based language. So very, very easy to develop these rules. There's a drag and drop menu, which can be used to compile rule sets very quickly and easily. So in terms of being compliant and driving compliance within your organization and being able to prove how compliant you are with regulation, this is particularly powerful. Thirdly, the third leg is identity access management. So yes, there are identity access management tools available as native controls within public cloud. However, what those native controls don't give you is a number of aspects or tools to make things safer within your environment. What the IAM safety module within Dome9 will give you is the ability to control at a granular level who accesses the cloud, for how long, and which level of authorization they have within that cloud environment. So to give you an example, if you're bringing in a contractor to develop some code for a particular application, then you can give them access to your cloud, but you can give them, using this tool, access to a particular part of your cloud, and for a particular length of time. So if they only need a week to develop the code, often in the old world, they would go away and those credentials would be left open because nobody had bothered to close them off. And they would provide a attack vector for someone trying to compromise the deployment. What Dome9 does is that it says after a week, we will close those credentials and we will close that window of opportunity for the hacker to get in. So after a week, the credentials are time bombed and that avenue is closed off. Not only that, but if you wish to elevate or reduce the access that the individual has to the cloud deployment, you can do that in real time. So via a smartphone application, you can give an individual access at a particular level for a particular length of time. And this means that you can control who accesses what, for how long, and close off a potential avenue of compromise that's been used many times before. So a layer of defense to existing public cloud identity access management services, restriction at a granular level of who uses and what, on-demand time-based authorization to minimize the risk of compromised accounts, tamper protection, any suspicious user activity that you see, the tool will alert you to that and enable you to close that off. And out-of-band authorizations, elevating or limiting the status of an individual. What can they access where from a mobile device? So, in summary, our threat defense schedule looks like this. If you're looking to protect your cloud deployment at a network level, you deploy IaaS, CloudGuard IaaS, and Dome9. If you're looking at a identity level, then Dome9 has its identity access management module. And if you're looking at the control plane level, then run the Dome9 Compliance Engine, which will, as I showed you, measure exactly how compliant you are with a particular standard. In terms of the controller that I mentioned earlier on, from a CloudGuard perspective, it adapts your security policy to the changes in your cloud assets, enables a unified security policy over multi-cloud environments. And I think this slide is a very good summary of our all-encompassing 360-degree cloud security model, providing for SaaS security, software as a service, so protecting against zero-day protection, anti-phishing, etc. On the left, right-hand side of the pie, CloudGuard IaaS in terms of protection at a network level and applying all those classic security technologies that we've come to know as being effective around IPS, URL filtering, application control, etc., antivirus, anti-bot, applying all those at a virtualized gateway level, interacting with private and public clouds, so speaking to the controllers of the likes of VMware NSX, speaking to Cisco's ACI in order to deploy adaptive security at the network level. And then finally, Dome9 in terms of analysis and granular view of what the security posture is within cloud, how is it affected by different changes that are being made, and how do we protect and be compliant with the regulations as they stand. So we believe this is an all-encompassing cloud security model. In terms of integration of the Dome9 solution to the rest of the CloudGuard suite is ongoing. We expect that to be in the early part of next year, totally integrated into our overall management suite. So, the most advanced threat prevention for cloud workloads, extensive visibility for the ever-changing cloud assets within the cloud. It's dynamic, it's changing all the time. We are leveraging native controls, but we're providing another dimension of visibility into the security posture of your cloud. Real-time compliance checks to prevent the sort of misconfiguration that we see on a regular basis which causes those cloud deployments to be insecure. Real-time compliance checks, adaptive security policy for ever-changing workloads, and finally, multi-cloud support, crucially with a single pane of glass management. So the ability to have a 360-degree view of your cloud environment, what your security posture is, and the ability to manage that from a single console. Thank you very much for listening. That's my slides today. If anybody has any immediate questions, then be happy to entertain that.
Okay, so it's Franz Orisvi now from Activereach. Okay, so Richard, if you can stop sharing your slides and then we'll switch to mine.
Yes, done that.
Thank you. A beautiful set of slides there. You'll now have a rather more practical set of slides from me. So my role at Activereach is to run the pre and the post-sales team. What we have here is a set of slides that are taken from actual Activereach customer. It's a relatively recent customer. Practical screenshots from the Dome9 application. So this customer is global in scale. They're not particularly massive, but they are global in scale. So we can see here they have a number of Azure and AWS accounts with some 646 assets split across load balancers, instances, Lambda functions, as you can see on the Dome9 dashboard, with 1,400 security groups just in AWS. I took the screenshot probably just before I think the CISO had his first heart attack. Hopefully it wasn't the results from this which caused that heart attack, because he no doubt will have thought that security wasn't an afterthought in his own organization. And unfortunately, the dashboard shows that as there is in many customers, you know, the requirements of the business mean let's just get it done now and we'll tidy up later on. And so the Dome9 dashboard is a great way for those either at board level or the CISO or the head of network security to get an overview across the entire estate. Richard mentioned the compliance section, which you can see in the middle. So the compliance section is not just for these three things. As Richard said, there are many hundreds of reports, including those for ISO 27001, GDPR and SOX, for example, and the ones that you can set up yourself. They can be run in an automated fashion so that you will get reports on a frequency you like. You don't have to use the dashboard. The reports can be mailed to you. At the bottom end of the screen, you can see some security aspects that the dashboard has pulled out. So to remind you, the dashboard is overlaid over the native controls in your public cloud infrastructure where those controls exist. And where they don't exist, the Dome9 product will add supplementary capability. So we can see here, all too common, unfortunately, I have to say, 273 security groups with the SSH port opened to the public internet. You know, and of course, all of you are probably saying that'll never happen in my environment, but it happens all too often. If you have outsourced developers, you need to give them access. Naturally, you assume that SSH is the best way to do that. So you open up access, they have a dynamic address, so you open it up to the whole internet, and you're relying on the application level security on your instances or your servers rather than the network level functions, because you simply don't know where they're coming from. As Richard has explained, that can be controlled now using the IAM features of the Dome9 product, so you can give access for the time period and only to particular resources. In the IAM column, if you look on the right-hand side, you can see there are 31 users that have not used their account for 90 days or more. So perhaps this is pointing at a failure of the leaver process in the HR function in this organization. These accounts, you know, genuinely, maybe the users are not using them, but maybe they've actually left the organization, they were on short-term contracts and access has been left in place. Before I move on to the next screen, Richard touched upon the API facilities within Dome9, and we do have customers now who are using this as part of their continuous integration or continuous development life cycles, where before applications are or releases are made available to their customers, they're actually running it through Dome9 and having CloudGuard check the security of what it is that they're proposing to release, and either permitting the release to go ahead or blocking it. Next screen, I'll just wait for. Yes, next screen drills down a little bit into some of these issues. So you can see a variety of things shown here. So S3 buckets without encryption, and yet again, in the middle, security groups with the administrative ports that are exposed to the public internet infrastructure. With the Clarity Dome9, you have a visualization of the security. So, and it will give you two views. It will give you the view that has been configured, and it will also give you, as is shown on this screenshot, I deliberately chose a relatively small diagram so it was easier to focus on. It will give you the effective policy. So this is the summation of all the security groups that exist and how they impact upon the resources in this particular VPC. So here we can see we've selected the Linux server in the center, and we have live the applicable rules that apply to that particular instance. So yet again, we see TCP port 22 for SSH open to the world, along with the web port. So the web port, of course, might be exactly what you want to have open, but perhaps you don't want to have the administrative access open. And it also shows that there is an internal subnet which has access on port 5665. So again, as Richard said, we can have one-click remediation to switch off the SSH port. Although I don't show them in this slide, Richard showed you that we can actually look at the flow logs. This is an Amazon instance. We can look at flow logs, and so we can see what kind of traffic is passing between the elements in the Clarity diagram. And finally, I realized that was run through fairly quickly. Why would you consider using Dome9 through Activereach? Well, our relationship with Dome9 started 5 years ago, so it predates the Checkpoint acquisition by about 4 years. We actually found the product in Israel, brought it over to the UK and the Northern European markets. In common with most of what we do, it's a hand-holding deployment. It's not a case of you buy the product and deal with our sales staff and then you're kind of left to your own devices. We have a consultative model, and we will work with you to advise you what to do and in what order to do it. So you can see here, this previous customer that I used for this illustration, they were completely blown away by the number of issues they had, and there was a level of sort of organizational paralysis. We've said, well, you know, hang on, how do we sort this out? You know, we're in multiple different regions, in multiple different time zones. You know, what do we need to tackle first? Because there were so many high alerts. So we worked with them, and you know, we continue to work with them to identify which things they should be looking at first. So what are their crown jewels in terms of those assets that might cause them brand reputation issues if they were accessed inappropriately from the internet, and locking those down, and then moving forward to educate their staff about increased access control mechanisms that can be applied, and also putting it into their build cycle. Obviously, because we have a range of customers, not every single customer is global, we're able to take best practices from our organization and pass them out to the rest of our customer base. And because we are effectively the reseller and that much closer to the customer than Dome9 or Checkpoint. It's in our interest to understand what it is that the customer is doing, and then to provide them with information on other things that they could be doing in order to secure or protect or monitor or modify their environment accordingly. And finally, we're based in the UK time zone. It might not sound important, but for some customers, they would actually prefer that their day-to-day business as usual stuff is dealt with by one consistent engineer in one consistent support team. And we have a very strong ethos of internal documentation because, of course, those of you who do or run teams with customer support facing elements, the one thing every customer expects is that you understand intimately their environment. So, of course, we keep lots of documentation for the customer, and when they've had changes of staff, we've been able to inform the incoming staff about what the security policies are, why they were applied, and to work with them if the environment changes. So finally, I won't spend too long on this slide, but this is obviously one of the services that they offer. You'll be sent a set of the slides after the talk, so you're welcome to look through this at your own leisure. If you have any questions, I realise I did rattle through my bit fairly quickly. Please ask them in the Q&A panel. Any questions that we don't answer, we will follow up with the person-to-person emails. Thank you.
Thanks, Raz. Yeah, as Raz says, we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can today during today's session, but we'll follow up with you on an individual basis. If we don't get around to your questions, we do have quite a few questions that have come in. So our first question is around feature parity. So is there feature parity between AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud Platform? I pass that over to you, Richard.
Yeah, we are at the moment, there isn't feature parity in terms of Dome9. However, AWS is really the platform that this has been focused on up until probably 2 years ago. However, we are getting to a point now where functionality for Azure and GCP will be in line with what's available for AWS by the end of Q1 next year.
Okay, great. Also got a question around particular markets that Dome9 is targeted at. So, Richard, that's probably one for you as well.
Yeah, we're seeing most interest from finance, from government, those who have to be absolutely rigorous about the standards that they adhere to. We're also seeing a lot of interest from the commercial sector in terms of businesses realizing that the challenges they face with GDPR, with ISO, etc., are really pressing, and they need something to understand where their position is and understand what they have to do to make themselves more compliant. So yes, I would say commercial, financial, government are the key sectors.
Okay.
If I can just jump in there, sorry, I'm aware that there's a bit of echo. We have tended to find that Dome9 is most attractive to customers that have more than perhaps 80 instances. Anything less than that, and hopefully your own security team should be able to manage it.
Okay, thank you. We've got a couple more questions here. One around the roadmap for Dome9. Are there any plans for further developments?
The answer to that is yes. There are a number of different new modules in development currently, including one that I didn't touch on, but will basically provide for in-depth threat intelligence around cloud deployments. That is coming into GA now. It's an element called Logic, and that will be available, or is available now, but is developing over time. And we're also looking at, obviously, full integration of Dome9 into the overarching checkpoint management suite. But again, that is a long term, that's next year.
Okay. And then finally, I think we'll just answer one more question regarding pricing. Are we able to indicate how Dome9 is priced?
Yes, it's priced on per asset basis. So an asset is a database, a virtual machine, a load balancer, any element which is sustaining within the infrastructure. What we don't count in terms of assets for licensing purposes are micro and nano instances that spin up in very short space of time and spin down again. But we do protect them. So don't misunderstand. We only license around those visible, consistent assets within the infrastructure, but we protect everything, including the serverless function. So the tool is licensed on a per 100 asset basis over a 1, 2, or 3 year schedule, so that you are protecting blocks of 100 assets at a time.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Richard and Raz. I think we're sort of running out of time, so I'd really just like to round up today's session by saying thank you to you both, Richard and Raz, for presenting today, and thank you to everybody that's attending. If you have any other questions, or indeed would like to arrange a live demo of Dome9, please do get in contact with us on marketing@activereach.net in the first instance, and we would be very happy to set that up. Just so you know, you will also receive a follow-up email from Activereach within the next few days with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. So on behalf of Activereach, Checkpoint, and our speakers, thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.